we're talking a lot about women, but we need to really discuss young women in order to make sure that cohort isn't lost. And that we make it visible, and therefore we target measures at that cohort. And one of the reasons why it's so important right now is because we're experiencing a global youth bulge. And so over the next 20 or 30 years, the majority of people, especially in developing countries, will be under 30. And they also represent a large number of unemployed. And so in a sense, what we're seeing globally is a failure to translate our gains in terms of education into gainful employment, and so it's that at that moment when they go from being children into being youth, into being young people, that is the moment of failure, and so something isn't working. If they leave school and they can't get a job, and if they fall into unsecure employment or even exploitative employment, especially for young women who are particularly vulnerable, especially to the sex trade and other sort of exploitative employments. So we really need to focus down on that target group and say we're failing them, and they are our future. And we see great potential if we just invest correctly, if we put in the measures now, and we're going to reap the benefits later. So that's why young women for us are incredibly important. In terms of HIV/AIDS, most people know, I don't know if most people know, that young women are more vulnerable than young men. And that in most parts of southern Africa, young women are even up to 5 times more likely to be HIV positive than young men of the same age group. And so that is really key in terms of determining life trajectories of girls. And we need to make sure that we're challenging this at a young age before they become infected, rather than just putting measures to allow them to live with AIDS. Prevention is multifaceted and it has to be holistic, because HIV/AIDS is linked to poverty, it is linked to economic deprivation, it is linked to lack of education. And we know that statistics show us that by providing education, even basic education, 5 years in school reduces a woman's chance of getting HIV/AIDS by up to 50%. And every extra year in school reduces that even more. And every extra year in school increases the chance that her children will be healthy and will be free from HIV/AIDS and will be educated themselves. So all the gains will be transmitted and passed on. And so really we're looking at, we don't like to use this idea of a silver bullet, but it's almost that. It's almost a silver bullet. This is the answer, education. And it'll really be, what halts intergenerational poverty. And we really see it as a key answer to a lot of the ills, and HIV/AIDS is one of them. It's an interesting paradox, and it really goes back to understanding that context is everything. So we're not looking at kind of universals, and we're understanding that someone's exploitative labor might be someone else's economic liberation, and so it's all about perspective. Now we have to acknowledge that there are certain basic rights that we want all people all over the world to enjoy, including young women, and we don't want them to be pushed into exploitative work. We don't want them, to have to engage in transactional sex in order to gain entry into export processing zones, which is what we've seen, for instance, in parts in Kenya, where they come in the morning and they stand outside the gates of these zones, and they have to engage in transactional sex with the guards in order to even get in and have a chance to work there. And then we come along and say, well, the conditions there are terrible. But actually, compared to not having work for that day at all, it's a step up. It's all a question of perspective. And so I think we have a lot of work to do in making sure that export is taking into account those specific challenges that young women face as female and as young people when they enter into these trade paradigms. And at the same time, we need to acknowledge that economic activity and growth is good, and that the benefits of that are intergenerational. And so we shouldn't put barriers up to stop that, but work together with governments and civil society to make sure that there are measures in place that girls' rights are protected.